Lowa makes one of my favorite modern boots, the Zephyr. So when we were prepping for this series and this video, I was really surprised that the Renegade is Lowa's #1 boot. And it has been for a really long time. But to me, this Lowa is kind of lame. So we're gonna cut this thing in half, run it through our test to really try to figure out what makes this boot so special that made it Lowa's #1 boot. Is this another case of a brand using goodwill developed over decades to sell a bad product? And why do I think that this Lowa is lame, even though I love this Lowa? And Lowa has a pretty long and interesting history because in 1923, a Bavarian cobbler named Lorenz Wagner founds Lowa and begins making heavy work brogues for his neighbors in the small village of Jetzendorf. By 1930, Lowa outgrows as the original cobbler shop and opens its very first factory. And in 1933, Lorenz becomes Jetzendorf's first mayor, but is quickly replaced because he was not super loyal to the popular political party in Germany at the time. But he was still loyal enough to make boots for the German Mountain Infantry Division in World War II. And after the war, the production boomed in the mountain boots, the ski boots, the street shoes, and Lowa received its official name, Lowa, which stands for Lorenz Wagner, or Lorenz Wagner. I try to throw some German pronunciations in there. Wagner's a composer, I knew that one. But in 1953, things had slowed down for Lowa with the Korean conflict, the post-war recession, and Lowa had to file for bankruptcy, and Lorenz Wagner passed away at the age of 60. But fortunately, in 1955, Lorenz's daughter Bertie takes over and saves Lowa from certain death. And in 1963, Jim Whittaker, the first American to summit Everest, does so in a pair of Lowa mountaineering boots. And then through the 70s, Lowa uses pioneering technology like polyurethane injected construction, vulcanized rubber soles. In 1972, they completely changed the ski boot game by introducing air cushion technology, which completely changed the way that ski boots were worn and fit. Then through the 80s, they continued to see more success in hiking and the mountaineering, all these different areas. But by 1993, they were hit once again with some financial issues, which forced them to sell to the Italian company Tecnica. Then by 1997, the first Renegade GTX Mid was produced, the grandfather of this boot, a model that would quickly gain notoriety and popularity to become one of the world's best-selling outdoor boots. Then in 2000, Lowa hit an impressive mark by selling 1 million boots in a single year. Just 10 years later, Lowa surpassed that mark by selling 2 million boots in a single year. Then in 2018, the 20th anniversary of the Renegade, Backpacker magazine puts this model into its Hall of Fame, and today Lowa is still a market leader in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, and products available in 80 different countries, produces 3 million pairs of boots a year, and is the largest employer in the town of Jetzendorf, where it all started back in 1930. So with all the ups and all the downs, has Lowa maintained its core ethics and values that built the brand over the last 100 years of mountaineering boots, ski boots, hiking boots? Or is this Lowa actually pretty lame? During the first few years of Rose Anvil, I had to work a couple other side jobs to make enough money to afford to run a new business. And one of those jobs was screen printing up in Logan at Badger Screen Printing. And me and my friends did it, so I learned the trade. I bought one of the X-Tools setups, and I was like, dang, this thing is nice. Like, let's reach out to them and see if they want to sponsor a video. Like, yeah, we'll sponsor a video, and we're gonna send you another X-Tool setup and the laser. And so it opens up an entire world of possibility for my brand and for just all the employees for their everyday stuff they want to do, screen printing on some bags, Sam's making a shirt. So it makes it really affordable for people that are just starting out with screen printing, or even businesses like mine who we don't need a huge screen printing setup. We just need a fast, easy, and convenient way to screen print. And that's exactly what X-Tools is. And a lot of times these entry-level things like X-Tools are really just terrible, but X-Tools is actually better in some ways than regular screen printing. Maybe the biggest thing is they have the registry marks that once you put the screen in, you know it's right in the exact same position. There's no like big adjustments left and right, and you have the tiny micro adjustments on the bottom to adjust it exactly how you need. It's more affordable, it's smaller, it's easier to use, and honestly it prints about as good as regular screen printing. It's easier to learn screen printing on, and most importantly for us in this shop that we're completely maxed out the space, it's a really small, tight screen printing setup. So if you've been wanting to get into screen printing, you are into screen printing, want another setup, check out X-Tools. I think you'd be surprised at how much you like them, how easy it is, because it really is a game-changing setup for screen printing. So check out X-Tools below, and thanks again to X-Tools for sponsoring this video. So what is this boot? Well, the brand is Lowa, the style is a Renegade GTX. They weigh a pretty light 1 pound 6 ounces. They retail for $255. They're made in Slovakia, and the way they position this is it's recommended for on-trail day hikes and light backpacking. And the Renegade's award-winning fit, comfort, and versatility have set the standard for multifunctional boots for 25 years. With its accommodating derby cut style, here comes the marking jargon, The Dura PU mono wrap frame construction for stability, full length stabilizer for underfoot support, sleek but rugged nubuck upper for durability, and a Vibram Evo sole for sure-footed traction. It's no wonder that the Renegade is our best-selling model. And if you want a pair of these, be sure to check them out via links in my description. So now let's start looking at the actual materials. How good is this boot? Well, let's start with the leather first, because this leather, like they said, it's a nubuck, but there is some suede mixed in there. You know, it's not like the biggest crime to say it's mostly nubuck and have a couple panels of suede, but that is worth noting because suede is from that lower part of the cross section. But they've used it in pretty smart ways, because right here, a lot of times they use suede in the high wear areas right here, and at the tongue, this spot right here is suede. It's a little bit softer, it's gonna conform more. It's a decent use of suede. It's 1.5 millimeters thick, so right in that sneaker thickness rather than what we see in more high quality boots. And that nubuck leather matches that same thickness. It's 1.5 millimeters thick. It is a true nubuck. You can see that microfiber texture on top, and you can see that grain portion at the very top portion of the cross section above the suede, where that grain still remains, where it gets sanded down. That's what nubuck is. It's just sanded full grain leather to give it that little nap and hide a lot of the flaws. We did the burn test on it, performed like just a natural leather, no plastic infused into it. We did the puncture test, took 103 pounds, so not bad, not amazing, kind of in the middle. Waterproof test, passed with flying colors. And so the leathers, it's not bad, but it is surprisingly thin. But that's not the issue I have with it, because when I first saw this boot, I honestly thought this was one of Lowa's like budget boots. And maybe it is, but I was really surprised that when we were planning this, that this is Lowa's #1 boot. It's one of their flagship boots. And my biggest concern is nothing to do with the leather, but how the leather's used. Because if you look at this, look how many different sewing points there are in this boot. And the problem with that is each of those little joints that is sewn is a potential fail point. We've all had it happen in our boots and shoes that a stitching point pops and it fails and you start having a bulging and the whole thing starts falling apart. And that usually is prevented by having overlapping leathers and multiple layers. But we took a little knife, popped some of these seams to see if it is truly double layered. And each of these little panels are their own independent panels that is sewn directly underneath. And so it's not like it's doubled up to where if you do pop a stitch, you'll be fine. If you pop any of these stitches anywhere, the boot's basically ruined, because you start getting mud in there, you start getting dirt, water's gonna get in between the layer, the Gore-Tex lining and the outer. And that's why in a lot of these traditional and old school hiking boots, especially from old school companies, they do more of a hole cut boot, similar to like the OG Danner mountain boots. Because with the hiking and backpacking boot, you want to reduce the fell points as much as possible, and that's why you see as few joints and as few seams as possible in real high quality hiking boots. And I tried looking up older pairs on the internet, and it seems like they used to have more of a hole cut style, and they also used to have a leather lining around the collar. And I still like the design of the boot. I think the lines are really nice. I think it's a good looking boot across the board. But just from a performance perspective, I would be concerned about all these seams. And speaking of that lining that I mentioned used to be, or at least it seems like it used to be leather, this is a pretty basic lining. It's just your classic breathable, moisture wicking, chevron kind of style linings that every single boot has. No heel counter protection, and just like a jersey material for the collar. So nothing special at all about the lining. It does have that Gore-Tex lining, and it is a true Gore-Tex lining. And so it could be a little bit more durable than the really cheap waterproof linings. At least it's Gore-Tex. But one thing that I do really like is this insole. It's an interesting insole, and right off the bat, I wasn't really sure how it worked and what the intention was behind it, because these brands are terrible at explaining what the function is of the features and what is the benefit of what they put in their boots. So what I assume this is for is it's just like a typical insole where you've got that material on top, a little bit of open cell foam underneath, but you've got this felted material on the bottom. And what this felted material is going to do is take that impression of your foot after a few, maybe 10 or 50 miles. It's going to take that impression of your foot and give you that custom contoured fit that everyone really loves in the more heritage style boots with the leather underneath your foot that compresses, giving that custom footprint in your boot. I think that's what this does. I think it's made to conform to your foot. I was curious, like, well, maybe it's wool, because that would go right in line with like what we've recently been talking about with the mugs and the slugs and like the value and the benefits of wool and all the really cool features of it. It's the fiber equivalent to what I love about leather. And so I put a lighter to this to see if it was wool, to give it like a little smell test, see if it smelled like burning hair, and it just smelled like burning plastic. So I don't think this is a wool felt on the bottom. I think it's just a synthetic like polyester, but it is really cool. It's a really cool concept, and we saw that already once in the Zephyr that actually does have wool in it, and it seems to work really well. And Lowa's the only brand I've ever seen do that, and it's really ingenious. So I just wish it was wool. Into one of the most important components, and probably the biggest offender of heavy marketing jargon, the midsole. They call it the direct injected or double injected Dura PU with Dyna PU shock absorbing zones. And the foam is about a 20 short A, so really, really soft. It's gonna give you that squish underfoot. And with that much squish, sometimes these boots can be a little unstable. So that's where this Dura PU mono wrap frame construction comes in, because all that is just this polyurethane slightly creeping up the sidewall. And it really doesn't go up that high. It kind of cups the heel, but it's nothing compared to the Zephyr. And it does definitely creep up a little bit higher, giving you more support. Does it actually work? I think it does. You can feel that support on the side of your foot, especially over here on your arch. And the whole boot is pretty stiff, you know, torsionally and just like trying to bend it. And so I think it does work. Does it justify the heavy marketing jargon? Not really, but like everyone does it, we do it. It's just part of marketing. It's just hard to cut through all the BS to actually figure out what it actually is. But that's all it is. It's just the polyurethane wraps up the sidewall. And as for the dual zones, I only see one other color of foam, and it feels like the exact same density or hardness. And so we'll see when we really get it cut in half, how much of this is like really a dual density and how much of this is just marketing jargon. But one thing I really do like about this is the outsole, because like you saw probably from the, what do we call it, like affordable foam-based hikers, that's what you can get from like most malls, and it's a very, very entry-level boot where it had a lot of gaps in the rubber outsoles where the foam was exposed, making it lighter, more flexible, but also wear out a lot faster. This level of boots, your more typical hiker from an actual hiking brand, they're usually solid soles. And that's exactly what this one is. It's a Vibram sole, comes in a 70 short A, so it's right up there in that harder work boot thickness. It's gonna last a long time while still giving you a decent amount of grip. We did the bar drop test on it, bounced up 6 inches, about in the middle of the pack. And the puncture test was a surprising one. It took 179.5 pounds to puncture through. That's right at the upper third of all the boots that we've tested. So I'm really curious what's on the inside of here, why it took so much to puncture through, what these dual density things are, and what is just BS, and what's marketing jargon, and ultimately why I think this Lowa's pretty lame. It's kind of crazy the amount of people that have no idea that all of this, the Rose Anvil thing, is cutting boots and shoes in half, all started from starting a leatherworking business called Rose Anvil. We make these handmade belts, our hand-stitched wallets, no sewing machines. It's literally saddle stitching. The way they sew together saddles is how we sew together these wallets. And our boot breaker insoles. You know, we got quite a few boot and shoe accessories, and including these boot breakers that are just thin enough that gives you squish, but not so thick that it's gonna change your sizing. And it's the last day of our scratch and dent sale where it's 30% off. So check all these out below, and thanks to Rose Anvil for sponsoring this video. All right, we got it cut in half a couple ways because there's a little something interesting on the inside of this I did not notice before we cut it in half. And if you're not subscribed, consider just pushing that little button. It helps us out more than you can imagine. And if you want to help us a little bit more, check out our handmade leather goods and our collaborations that we do. Put links to all that below. So now let's see what's inside the Lowas. So this shank is really, really interesting. I've never seen any other shank like this. There's some good and there's some potentially bad with it, because I had to cut it like lengthways this way to try to cut right underneath of that shank, because you can see it's got little ribs that run all the way through. They give it a little more structure. It's almost like an I-beam, how it gets rigidity from that structure of the I shape. Similar concept here. And that's why they're so rigid. Even though they're a really, really light boot, where's the whole boot? Even though it's a really light boot, it's surprisingly rigid. And so that might be part of why people love these so much. Aside from the bad stuff, a really lightweight but really rigid boot works really well for hiking, because you're not wearing out your foot and your ankle and your arch by needing to calf raise yourself on every single step with like a heavy backpack on. That rigidity helps reduce that pressure and spring you a little bit forward. The only concern I have is that the shank ends before the heel starts. And so you do have like a little bit of a pivot point right there. See how like when I bend this, it pivots right at the heel. Maybe there's some reason behind it, But as far as I understand, it would be a lot more effective to go past the heel so you don't get that drop right at the edge of the heel that you probably felt in a terrible pair of boots because it's not supportive enough, and you get that really high pressure point right there. It's because the shank's not strong enough. So that's got me a little bit concerned, but more concerning is this whole dual density thing that's like, technically it's kind of dual density, but like look how little of this brown foam is on the outside. It doesn't do anything, if we're being honest. It feels like it's a lot more of an excuse to just say it's dual density and like this dual, and you know, whatever jargon they used, because it's not gonna do anything. On the inside, it's pretty basic. You know, there's really nothing special except for that shank. And so there is some marketing jargon that's a little bit BS. There's some things I like, some things I don't like. So the things that I like are the shank. I think it's a really smart way of doing things. I like this insole concept. I like the rigidity and the other things we talked about just barely. For the things I don't like is that number one is just this paneling. You know, there's just a lot of potential fail points there. It's not the worst crime, but it is something that the Zephyr's better at, and just seems like it's baked in fail points when it could, especially if the old versions really were less paneled and just more of a hole cut. It doesn't make a lot of sense to move from that to this. Aesthetically, it looks pretty good, and I also don't like that they removed the leather from the collar. But basically, the number one thing I don't like about this is it's just pretty basic across the board. There really isn't a lot that makes this boot stand out to me in really any way. There's just pretty standard leather, pretty standard lining, standard midsole, standard outsole. It looks pretty standard, it fits pretty standard. It feels like a hiking boot underfoot. So there's nothing really to write home about, but that might be why it's so popular. Not everyone wants a big flashy boot with tons of features. Some people just want a standard hiking boot for a decent price, and that's exactly what this is. You know exactly what you're gonna get from it. There's nothing extreme. It's gonna fit you, it's gonna be comfortable, it's gonna do the job. And despite the fail points, it's a mean boot. Not mean in the way like, yeah, that thing's mean, that's a gnarly boot, that's good, that's cool, that's sick. Not that mean, the very average version of mean. Like, it's just right in the middle. It's just a very average boot, and I think that's where it shines. Otherwise, what else would people love about this boot so much? So then why would you consider this over the Zephyr? I wouldn't. I think the Zephyr's better. I think it's cooler looking, it's better materials, it has more actual functionality baked into it, and I just think it's better in basically every way, and it's around the same price. So for me, even though this is their number one boot, I would just get the Zephyr. So let me know what you think. Let me know what other boots you want us to cut apart in this series. If you've had both of these, put in the comments section like your experience, the pros and cons of each. Maybe I'm missing something. Would you pick the Zephyr over the Renegade? And if you haven't seen the Zephyr video, check it out below. And thanks for watching this video. Be sure to push that little subscribe button so we can afford to keep doing this. And thank you guys for all your support with this channel, the Anvil 2 channel, our handmade leather goods we make right here in the shop, and our collaborations. It's what makes all this possible. See ya. Bigger, I guess.
New round.
A little bit bigger.